My name is Richard, and for almost 29 years, I believed marriage meant that when life became difficult, you stood beside each other. I was about to learn that sometimes the person standing beside you can be the first person to walk away when you need them most. My mother, Evelyn, was 82 years old. She lived alone in a small house about 20 minutes from us. She wasn't helpless. In fact, she was one of the strongest women I had ever known. But age had started taking small pieces of her independence away. One rainy Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice sounded different. "Richard," she said quietly, "I don't feel right. The doctor told me I shouldn't ignore these symptoms. I think I need to go to the hospital." I immediately grabbed my keys. Then I remembered my car was sitting at the repair shop. The mechanic had called earlier and said it wouldn't be ready until the following morning. I turned toward my wife, Vanessa, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. "Vanessa, Mom needs to go to the hospital. Can I take your car?" She didn't even look up. "No." I thought I had misunderstood. "Vanessa, it's urgent. I'll bring it right back." She finally looked at me. "Richard, not my problem. Figure it out." Those words hit harder than I expected. I stared at her for a few seconds. Then I simply said, "Okay." I called a rideshare for my mother. I stayed on the phone with her until the driver arrived, then followed her to the hospital using a taxi. Thankfully, Mom was stable. The doctors wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Around midnight, I sat beside her hospital bed while she slept. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the machines. I kept thinking about Vanessa's words. Not my problem. 29 years of marriage. 29 years of birthdays, bills, vacations, arguments, family emergencies, and ordinary mornings. And suddenly, when my mother needed help, she had decided it wasn't her problem. But I wasn't going to fight about it in a hospital room. Instead, I made a decision. I would stop asking people to care about something they had already decided wasn't important to them. The next morning, Mom was feeling better. I arranged transportation for her and made sure she had everything she needed. Then I went home. Vanessa wasn't there. I noticed something strange. Her car was gone. I didn't think much of it. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My phone rang. It was Vanessa. I answered. "Hello." Nothing. Then she hung up. A minute later, she called again. Answered. "What's going on?" She didn't speak. She hung up again. Then another call. Then another. Within an hour, my phone had been ringing constantly. By the afternoon, I had counted 38 missed calls. I finally answered. Her voice was shaking. "Richard, please don't do this." I frowned. "Do what?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." "No, I don't." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Please come home." I looked around my mother's empty hospital room. "Why?" "Because everything is falling apart." I didn't understand. "What happened?" She started crying. And then she said something I never expected. "Your decision last night changed everything." I sat down. "What decision?" she whispered. "The bank." That's when I realized Vanessa had discovered something I hadn't told her. For years, I had been paying most of the household expenses, mortgage payments, insurance, property taxes, utilities, and several other bills. But there was one thing Vanessa had never paid attention to. My mother had spent decades teaching me that independence wasn't about having money. It was about never allowing someone else to control your life. So years earlier, I had created a separate emergency account specifically for situations involving my mother. I had never hidden money from Vanessa, but I had never mixed that account with our everyday household finances either. After what happened the night before, I had decided to make one more change. I moved the emergency funds into an account that. Then she said something that changed the entire conversation. "I thought you were going to leave me." I was stunned. "Why would you think that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the counter and picked up a folder. Inside were copies of documents. She had discovered that my mother had recently changed her estate plan, not because of Vanessa, not because of me, but because Mom had decided that whatever happened to her property should be used to create medical trusts for her grandchildren. Vanessa had assumed that money would eventually come to our household, and now she realized it wouldn't. That was when I understood why she had called me 38 times. It wasn't because she suddenly cared about my mother. She was afraid of losing something she thought she was entitled to. I looked at her and asked one question. "If Mom hadn't changed her will, would you still be calling me?" Vanessa couldn't. That silence told me everything. For years, I had mistaken peace for happiness. I thought if we weren't fighting, our marriage was healthy. But sometimes people aren't quiet because everything is fine. Sometimes they're quiet because one person has stopped asking for anything. That evening, I went back to the hospital. Mom was awake. She smiled when I walked in. "Everything okay?" she asked. I sat beside her. "I think I finally understand something." "What?" "You spent your whole life telling me to choose people who choose me back." She smiled softly. "Did you finally listen?" I laughed. For once. A few days later, Mom came home. I arranged everything she needed: a medical alert system, regular transportation, a home care schedule, and a nearby emergency contact. I didn't make my mother feel like a burden. I made sure she knew she still had a son who would show up. As for Vanessa, we spent several weeks living separately. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed clarity. Eventually, we sat down with a counselor. Thought if we weren't fighting, our marriage was healthy. But sometimes people aren't quiet because everything is fine. Sometimes they're quiet because one person has stopped asking for anything. That evening, I went back to the hospital. Mom was awake. She smiled when I walked in. "Everything okay?" she asked. I sat beside her. "I think I finally understand something." "What?" "You spent your whole life telling me to choose people who choose me back." She smiled softly. "Did you finally listen?" I laughed. For once. A few days later, Mom came home. I arranged everything she needed: a medical alert system, regular transportation, a home care schedule, and a nearby emergency contact. I didn't make my mother feel like a burden. I made sure she knew she still had a son who would show up. As for Vanessa, we spent several weeks living separately. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed clarity. Eventually, we sat down with a counselor. Vanessa apologized, but this time, I didn't accept an apology simply because I wanted everything to go back to normal. I asked her to answer one question. If that phone call had never happened, would you have understood how much those words hurt me? She started crying. No. That was the most honest answer she had given me in years. And strangely, it was the first step toward healing. Our marriage didn't magically become perfect, but something changed. Vanessa began visiting my mother. She started helping with small things. She stopped treating Mom's needs like an inconvenience. And one afternoon, while Mom was sitting in her garden, Vanessa walked over and quietly said, "I was wrong." Mom looked at her. Then she smiled. "You don't have to be perfect. Just don't make the same mistake twice." Vanessa nodded. I stood several feet away, listening, and for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Because that night at the hospital, I had thought my biggest problem was a broken car. It wasn't. The broken car had simply exposed something much bigger. It showed me exactly who would show up when life became inconvenient. And sometimes, that's the most valuable truth a person can leave. That night, I thought I was choosing between my mother's needs and my wife's convenience. I was wrong. I was choosing between continuing to beg for basic compassion or finally standing up for the woman who had spent 82 years standing up for me. My mother didn't need a perfect son. She only needed her son to show up. And when my wife said, "Not my problem," I finally understood something. You can't force someone to care, but you can decide what kind of person you will be when they don't.